For everybody to hit unmute on their devices or unmute their speakers so they can hear us. Good day, everyone. I am Jason Isaac, the founder and CEO of the American Energy Institute, a trade organization committed to free market principles and unabashedly oppose political agendas like ESG and decarbonization and net zero. Energy transition. What am I forgetting? There's so many other virtue signaling monikers that people use today. Oh, low emission future. I can't forget that one. I live a high carbon lifestyle, and I think everybody else should too. That's why Congressman Jamie Raskin from Florida calls me the carbon king, something I wear proudly on my license plates and my wallet and my business cards. But I'm excited to have everybody here today for this American Energy update. So much winning, in my opinion, although there is a cause for some concern. But joining me today is one of the top economic minds in energy, someone who has her finger on the pulse of the industry, someone who I turn to often for education and materials, and she's taught me so much. Trisha Curtis, CEO of PetroNerds and host of the PetroNerds podcast. Trisha, thank you for being here. I'm assuming you're joining us from Denver, Colorado today,
I
but I
am.
know that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. Trisha, go ahead, tell everybody a little bit about yourself, because I'm sure we have some new listeners and watchers today.
Absolutely, yes. So I'm also an economist for the American Energy Institute, and I love working with Jason because he actually does listen. So we talk a lot, and he asks questions, and he listens. So it's great. And I go on nerdy rants about a lot of things. So yeah, if you haven't listened to the Petronas podcast, you should. We do stuff like this, but it's great too because Jason's very focused on the policy and the political side, which I love and I like to get involved with. But I'm also focused on the actual what's going on, the nuances of energy. So everything that happened today, there's a lot to swallow. Everything that happens on any given day impacts the markets and impacts oil prices, and trying to dissect what's actually happening from a policy perspective versus what's happening to supply and demand fundamentals is huge. But I spend a lot of time with industry leaders and folks in and outside the oil and gas industry, explaining what's happening in the world of energy markets, geopolitics, risk, and the global economy. So, needless to say, there is a great deal amount of volatility, I think, within the stock market. And I think I would just open this by saying there's a lot. I'm still very optimistic from an energy standpoint on the Trump administration and a lot of policies and on a lot of policies in general on deregulation. But I do think if you were turning on the TV or the stock market today in the last few days, you've seen a lot of nerves and consternation in the market. And that's something that we may have to talk about and bounce a little bit, especially in the talk when we're talking about trade and tariffs and everything as well.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Appreciate it. So, let me give you a little bit about what you can expect over the next hour. We'll break down some of the latest economic trends in oil, natural gas, coal overall, just energy in particular. And Trisha and I will dive into some federal policies, some actions that have been taken within the Trump administration, within the cabinet members, and some federal policies that are advancing as we speak. From the first 39 days of the Trump administration, I think I saw a stat today that the President Trump has answered over 1,000 questions to media since he's been in office. I think it took about 3 days for him to eclipse President Biden's record of talking to media and answering questions. So over 1,000 questions. It's impressive how available he makes himself. We'll also cover what's happening at the state level, where there's some really good action taking place to secure America's energy future. And of course, we'll be taking your questions. So stay tuned for Q&A. You can drop questions into the YouTube comments, or if you're on Facebook or LinkedIn. I do see that we're having some problems with the Twitter feed. So if you're trying to watch on Twitter, just jump over to YouTube, go to the American Energy Institute channel, and you can see us there. But first, I think Trisha is going to lead us off with some economic overview. I know you jumped into this a little bit, but what's kind of the big picture, for U.S. And global economic trends?
Yeah, so I think global economic trends are not positive. I do want to make sure, Jason, that you bring me back to the talking about coal and natural gas and the domestic policies, because I really do think we're kind of at this new precipice right now where we finally have an administration and a change in leadership that I do think has meaningful consequences to like the state of energy play, especially when we think about coal in the grid and natural gas fired power generation. So I want people to have a little bit of a caveat there that I'm bullish on U.S. activity and everything, but overwhelmingly, if you're looking at the global economy, it doesn't look great. And I say that because you're getting your feedback loop from the stock market, and the stock market's doing a really bad job of just dissecting Trump policies. Most of them have not landed. So there is a massive amount of talk and simple talk, right, on tariffs. And I am really deep in the weeds right now on some deliverables. And so I'm very deep on stuff on China. And I've been going through the latest actual the U.S. Joint congressional meetings that are these China Security and Review Commissions, Economic and Security Commissions. There was just one on Made in China 2025. I encourage everyone to listen to it. It's phenomenal, and it will make you really appreciate the concerns and the battle that we're dealing with China, especially from a manufacturing perspective. And it also make you realize that a lot of these policies are coming out of the Trump administration on tariffs are targeted at China. And I think that's being missed. So when we're talking about Canada and Mexico, so much of this trade is coming through these countries that that's what part of this is. These tariffs are going after this. So that's one piece. And there's a lot of concerns about what are the inflationary impacts of this. The Federal Reserve is on record now on multiple occasions of talking about Trump policies. This is a big disconnect and big difference from the Biden administration when they wouldn't talk about Biden policies or fiscal spending or congressional spending and how that's impacting inflation. So there's a not a lot of clarity in the market. And then I think on energy, what we're seeing for oil prices at, it's was $69 last I checked. We're flirting with 69 to 70. You're seeing you have natural gas prices about $3.84. And so with Trump meeting with Zelensky and this blow up and him leaving, that has not impacted oil prices as much as people thought, unless I'm missing something and they've went up or tanked. But the oil prices right now, I think at around a $69 handle, are telling you that that's kind of global supply and demand. It's not necessarily baking in a peace deal, but it is saying that we have a weaker global economy, especially within Europe, especially within China, and we have a lot of supply, and we have a lot of supply in the U.S. And then there's I would say the biggest questions that I think a lot of executives, a lot of CEOs, a lot of people in the industry have is what are the where are oil prices going to go? Where could they go and why? And the same for natural gas. And I'm going to stop there. But those are two big things I think we should at least address and get into maybe in Q&A and stuff as well.
Yeah, and as people aren't that haven't caught the news, Zelensky walked out of the White House today after having a pretty heated conversation with President Trump. I think President Trump at one point in time kind of gave him like the Heisman and said, "You're done. You've talked enough," or something along those lines. I don't want to try to quote him exactly, but it got pretty contention between President Trump and Vice President Vance. And Zelensky Zelensky left with no deal being done. Now, people keep talking about this deal for minerals. Those of us that are in oil and gas are thinking, well, does this mean some of their oil and gas? Are we talking critical minerals and rare earth elements and things like that that are necessary for defense and computers and things of that nature? But no deal was done. Do you think that is that having any impact on the markets? And I haven't looked at the markets in the last couple of hours. Is that having any impact? Will it have any
Well,
impact?
so I think it was having an initial impact, and that's that. So there's a lot of things at play, and I would say you have to be very careful of looking at the stock market. And the reason I say that is because when we're in oil and gas, that's where we're going for intel, right? That's largely coming from the stock market. So the stock market is not doing a good job in really interpreting policies and doing rigorous analysis from geopolitics, economics to oil and gas. I was prepping for another podcast, had a very interesting discussion that will drop. Very, very interesting because this is a World War II guy, and he is very opinionated on Ukraine and Trump. Does not have the same view as I do, but so we talked about this, and right before I did this podcast, I'm watching what was going on TV, and I'm watching the market. There was a bit of a sell off, and now we're up apparently on the S&P. So I think that this contention was, Trump rolled back. He called Zelensky a dictator. He rolled that back. He was asked about that a couple days ago. He said, "Oh, did I do that?" And so to me, that's Trump basically making peace. And then he's gonna, I don't worry about what Trump says. It's about what he does. And this is what I told the guy in the podcast of it's really its actions. And so what does the US end up doing? And I'm honest on where I stand on Russia and Ukraine. I do not think Russia's a good country. I don't think Putin is a good actor. I think he's a bad guy. We really need to take that seriously, but China's worse. Um, I when we're looking at Zelensky in this meeting, I need to go back and watch the whole thing because I only saw clips of it. It wasn't good. Obviously, it was not a good meeting. Now, there apparently was a deal. And this is what I'm hearing, and this is the gentleman I was talking to, Phil O'Brien, was saying that he thought the deal probably were, very outlandish terms that were changed at the last minute that Zelensky was not happy to see. And so obviously we don't know what those terms were, but he was probably not happy when he saw them. And Phil O'Brien was saying that, they were probably pushing uh Zelensky to sign them there, and he's angry, and so the whole meeting turns out angry. Well, you can only push so much, right? And if they're terms he can't accept them. So the fact that Trump had called him a dictator, had said he should leave office or have an election, and Zelensky says, then he rolls back the dictator thing, he has him in office, and that even Zelensky says, yes, we'll have elections. I'm willing to do that. So, I don't know if this is as horrible as everyone thinks. In this podcast too, Phil was saying, he thinks Trump and Putin are on the same side. I disagree with that. I don't think Trump is in bed with Xi Jinping or Putin. So I think this is way more complicated than people think. This is the opening salvos of a peace deal. You have an ongoing war in Ukraine, and you have a previous administration that set the tone for this war. Right? They gave them weapons and they gave them money, but they didn't want to end. They didn't want to necessarily end the war, and so Europe is now in this predicament where they haven't geared up their funding, they haven't done anything, and so now they're potentially at this situation where they're going to have an ongoing war in Ukraine, and they're not going to have the U.S. backing it. So that would create volatility within the stock market, right? That would create volatility in oil prices and everything. When it comes to this deal, and again, somebody put on my YouTube feed that they called me a neocon when I was talking about Europe and Trump, no, or Europe and Russia. No one knows exactly what's happening, right? I don't have this stuff. So I am giving you my best analytical judgment. I'm prognosticating. I am not saying I know these things for fact. But I think what we can understand is that what's going on with this deal, Bessett, the Secretary of Treasury, he's talking about this. He was involved in the first meeting in Saudi Arabia between the Russians and Rubio and Hegseth and everyone. And so he was saying last week when I was listening to this, that he was talking about this deal, this minerals deal, that he was saying it's a reason for the US to he was explaining that the US is going to sign this minerals deal, and then the US has an economic reason to be in Ukraine. I think all but said this gives the US a reason to be there, and then we get to sell that to the American populace. So it was a deal that the administration is trying to cut so that we could be involved with Ukraine while not being completely involved with Ukraine. So that's what Bessett was saying. I'm guessing that we know Ukraine has minerals. They're not necessarily all the rare earth minerals, but it is graphite. It's all kinds of stuff. I'm not saying that they don't have this, but I do want to point out that I'm just thinking about unconventional oils in Poland and all these places that everybody was excited after the Bakken boomed. They never happened. They didn't happen because these countries don't have the resources. They happened because these countries are messy and it's hard to get the stuff out of the ground. Ukraine was a messy country that was corrupt before, and I don't say I am not condoning this war in Ukraine. It was horrible. It is aggressive. Ukraine is not at fault for this. I'm not blaming the victim, but this was not a look at their energy grid. Look at their grid before the war in Ukraine. They were not a thriving country economically speaking. And so then when you have a war brought on, it's worse. And so, in many ways, the fact that they've been able to defend themselves the way they have is impressive. But to Trump and Vance's point, it has come at the backing of all this money. And so I'm not saying anybody is completely right here, but this is confusing and messy. Nobody has all the information, and there's going to be a lot of pointing fingers and a lot of stuff going on. But I think this mineral deal, I am far more concerned about getting this stuff out of the ground in a war torn country. So I think this might be more about a deal or just a foothold being there and saying, hey, we don't want the Russians to have this, or we don't want the Chinese to have this. So I think that might be about it. And we have to get really real, folks, that you may want to put a wedge between China and Russia. And we need to do this a long time ago. We need that wedge. Russia's never going to be our ally. Putin is never going to be our friend. He's a very intelligent politician. People call him autistic and think he's an idiot. He's not. One, he wasn't dying of cancer. He's clearly not dead, and he's not an idiot. He is extremely intelligent. He's very good at this, and so we have to be very smart about how he's playing all sides here, and that's what he's going to do. He's clearly open to a peace deal. Ukraine is open to a peace deal. I mean, this is. I just heard from Phil O'Brien on this podcast that Russia's losing 45,000 people a month. That is a massive amount of human power you are losing in fighting this war. If you
Incredible.
think they don't want a deal, they do. It's not for the same reasons. They want it because they probably want to have a pause, and then in a few years they start this up again. Absolutely, you can't trust them. But it doesn't mean that there's not all these factors at play right now. So I say it's really complicated. I don't say I know everything, but pretending just to put your head in the sand and it's as clean as these guys are good and these guys are bad, and it'll be just fine, and just give them more money and this will work. Clearly just giving the money isn't working either. We would have to escalate this war, put troops in or something to end it, which I'm actually not opposed to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting, 45,000. I had not heard that number. That's incredible. Because here it is, the president of Hungary just this week announced that if you have more than two children, you're a woman that has more than two children, you'll get exempt for life from personal income taxes. So they're trying to find incentives for people to grow their families and have more children. And Russia's losing 45,000 people a day. That's
A month, a
pretty,
month.
a month. Sorry, yeah, a month. That's
Yeah,
still devastating. Absolutely
yep.
devastating. Incredible. So, the 10% tariffs on China, I guess, have just been doubled recently, or will go another 10% will be added on. I think March 4th or 5th is the date that I heard that will
Yep.
go into effect. And companies like Apple have so far said they're going to absorb those tariffs on products coming in, but how much longer can they do that?
So I think we're in an interesting position in that the economy can't take any inflation. It's sort of like the economy. If oil prices were go to 80, you were guaranteed a recession. Like we're probably headlong into recession anyway. But I mean, you can't have inflation. You can't have price spikes. So companies, and I hadn't heard that Apple had said that because I've been deep on the weeds on stuff. But if they're saying they're going to absorb that, they have to, right? Because an iPhone is 1,600. You can pay $2,000 for an iPhone. It's
Crazy.
ridiculous. Even their cheap ones are several $100s. So they have to. But the 10% tariff, so we saw this, Trump is, again, there's a little back and forth every time the mic's in front of him, and they're working out these tariffs because clearly they're talking to Mexico and Canada. So I say this to say I'm not defending anything, or so. Well, I mean, I am in some ways because I think there's need for some of these tariffs, but you don't know until you know. So let the facts get out, and then we can start dissecting them. So the tariffs on Canada and Mexico are supposed to go into effect March 4th. Um, they were supposed to go into effect a month ago, and then there was a pause on them. So I guarantee you right now, there's a lot of conversations happening between the Canadian and the Mexican delegations in Washington right now to see if they can strike something. If I were Trump, I would absolutely advise that he do not put tariffs on, he exempt Canadian crude, and that he use the tariffs for Canada and Mexico as to say, until you can tell me that you are going to work with me on China and pushing China out, we're going to keep these tariffs on. And I'm going to go on a guess that I think that's actually what this conversation, what a lot of this is really about. These tariffs are not necessarily going, and this is why people like economists are struggling with this to like, are they short? Are people just going to take in these inflationary costs like the company and then not pass that through? And what happened was when we had the first Trump tariffs, and there's actually a lot of work that's been done on this in terms of washing machines and things. Some of that did happen. Some of it got passed through. Some of it was one off, so it didn't actually cause inflation. What we're seeing now with this Trump tariffs on China that you mentioned, the 10%, and then we're adding another 10%. I Again, I was having this conversation earlier, and my counterpart Phil O'Brien didn't think that was a big deal. 20% tariffs on China on top of the additional tariffs, and the fact that we're going to have more tariffs on EU, on chips, on autos, are this is about China, right? This is the stuff that they're going after. And I really do encourage people to listen to this latest testimony, look at Made in China 2025, and realize the stuff that we're trying to hit China, we're trying to prevent them from. They're already a manufacturing powerhouse, but they're increasingly a manufacturing powerhouse on really technologically sophisticated stuff. And so if you are thinking you want to cut your adversary down, this is what we're doing. I mean, you may not want to hear that, but that's this reality. This is what these tariffs are about. So I also think that, again, thinking about how long they're going to be in place, is this a these are partly negotiating tactics, right? You put them on, then
Mhm.
you negotiate, then you figure something out. If I'm Canada, Mexico, I need to figure out what I need to do to make this work. We've had so many goods flowing in from China under this de minimis rule. I mean, just we're talking $800 per day per person is completely unregulated that comes in through China. It's tens of thousands of packages that are not regulated. This can be medicine, this can be baby toys, this can be stuff with lead paint in that. I mean, you name it, it's in there. So this sounds silly, but it's not. This is what a lot of this is about, and it's also about them, just being able to build up a manufacturing powerhouse that can, threaten and compete with the U.S. in terms of conflict.
So on the federal side, I think the last time you and I were together personally was November 11th, just last year after the election, doing a post-election recap with now Secretary of Energy Chris Wright, who I'm proud to say joined our association that week, the same week that he got nominated to be the secretary, just days after being with you and I. So we must be good luck charms, or maybe bad luck charms, depending on how tough his new job is. But still, really exciting. And I think one of his first actions was to approve an LNG export terminal in Louisiana, Commonwealth LNG. What does that mean? There's some people, I remember T. Boone Pickens when he was alive, talking about we shouldn't be exporting natural gas because it's going to drive up the cost. So what are what's the outlook for natural gas not only here in America, which we know we have a lot of, but how's that fare for our friends and allies around the world?
Yeah, that's great. And really, really great question. So if I don't get into the exact answer you want, keep pushing further because this is probably one of the biggest disconnects, at least initial disconnects for Trump coming into office that I've heard is that we are going to export more natural gas and then we're going to have this price spike in US natural gas and we are going to hurt American consumers and because we're helping our allies. And that is the biggest load of BS I've ever heard. It's unfactually, it's not true. And there are places where I want the Trump administration to be more hawkish on China. I am not a fan of Putin. I mean, there's lots of things I would like to build on with the Trump administration. But when it comes to energy, we are on the same damn page. Chris Wright is like, I mean, I can't tell you like everything that has come out of his mouth and all of his policies. We are absolutely on the same page. So he came out in addition to that, approving the LNG export facility. That was not just symbolic. I mean, it kind of was because he lifted the export ban of permits in the future. And you heard so much of this in the past year when the Biden administration put that ban on future export permits on January of 2024. You heard so much pacification by folks in the stock market and analysts and everyone saying, this doesn't mean anything. We have plenty of export capacity. This is just about future stuff, which we won't need. Well, it had a huge impact because Azerbaijan and everyone and the UAE started signing contracts like crazy with Europe because it long-term contracts. We're talking 20 to 30-year term contracts with Repsol, with ENI, with all these companies, with these countries, with Azerbaijan, with UAE, all those because they didn't think we were going to be at the table. And so it's so important that it doesn't matter if it's future, it matters that you have a rule of law, you have an open pipeline for development. So when it comes to natural gas in the US, it is a smaller molecule than oil. It is very, very easy to produce. When we frack these wells, I mean, we have about 600 rigs running in the US. Less than 100 of them are going after natural gas. So much of the natural gas of the about 126 billion cubic feet per day that we produce in gross withdrawals, so much of that is coming from associated gas from the Permian. That's like and oil reservoirs. That's a driver that helps push up this oil. And so we have to appreciate that when we're going for the oil, we get this natural gas. And also, we just have a corrupt on natural gas. It's very easy to frack. You crack this rock and this comes out of the ground. So if we wanted to produce a hell of a lot more, we're talking like way more than 126 BCF a day, like 200 BCF a day, we absolutely could easily.
Yeah. Yep.
We can produce it. Now we have to build the infrastructure to do it. So that's why I say when you're saying you're proving infrastructure and you're proving permit facilities to export LNG, that's part of this, right? So Chris Wright and Trump are basically saying we are open for business. We're proving this. And so we're signaling make contracts, do business, get the capital developed in the US to actually build these export facilities. And then the other pieces are going to be to actually pipelines and infrastructure. So absolutely huge. We have the natural gas. We need to build the infrastructure. And that was the first piece of this, right? To signaling that we're open for business and we're changing the terms that we had in the previous administration. So immensely serious and really exciting. And I think the other piece, just to build on that a smidgen and just to get nerdy a little bit, is that the price of natural gas, we can handle this, we can handle an economy with $4 something MCF gas. And I think a lot of operators and folks in the natural gas community would love to see 4.5, if we had $4 to 4.5 MCF gas, they would love that for Henry Hub. And we could actually have that work as well. What we need is action on the utility side. We need that savings. No one is paying $4.5 an MCF from their utility company. We're paying $18 an MCF on average last year when prices were $2. So the discrepancy of that is massive. The administration and Chris Wright and folks with DOE need to address that with the utility gap. And we need to, if we stop decommissioning coal-fired power generation and we actually allow to utilize coal and that really inexpensive coal-fired power generation, we can use that to offset these price spikes for natural gas. And we can actually have the best of both worlds. We have more energy than anybody in the entire world. We should not even be concerned about competing with China for manufacturing because we have more natural gas and we have more coal than they do. And yet we're having this conversation. So we can fix this. It's just a matter of will.
Yeah, we can reshore millions of jobs right back here to the United States and really have a reindustrialization of manufacturing with cheap energy. China is kicking our butts right now. You've taught me this over the last year or so. The amount of oil that they're importing from Iran, which now those sanctions are going to be
Yes.
re-implemented and reinforced, and so that supply to China is going to get cut off.
And
But
Venezuela.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So that's great for American energy, and you're right. I mean, I was talking to some of our members just last week who are having to pay to get rid of natural gas. They're
Yep.
having to pay the transporters to get, and other companies are flaring it if they can get permits to do that. I was on the last time I was on a rig, they're doing regasification and re-injecting that gas into the wells to produce more oil. They're using that gas to run equipment on well sites. So companies are getting really innovative. But what the market should see and consumers should see is lower cost of energy by getting more export terminals approved, because you're right, it's going to build the infrastructure. And what leaves me optimistic that the infrastructure is going to get the capital that it needs is just an announcement this morning. Wells Fargo and Company has formally abandoned its net zero
Yep.
commitment. Now, and as I've told people before that are in the financial institutions, some of them that have been impacted by work that I did on what became Senate Bill 13, that says if you boycott fossil fuels, then Texas is going to boycott you. I've heard the right things from them. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that maybe Wells Fargo will actually do the right things and start investing in oil and natural gas and coal, especially coal. I think Chris Wright alluded to this about a week and a half ago, talking about coal. We shouldn't be shutting down coal in this country. It's affordable, it's reliable, and thanks to our advanced pollution control technology, we're world leaders in clean air in this country. And have done that while utilizing coal, something that Germany's or China's kicking our butt on. Not Germany, gosh, they're gone, in my opinion. Sorry, I digress a little bit there, but that's some optimism with Wells Fargo. HSBC, another financial institution that fired an employee a couple of years ago because he basically called it the climate scam, this decarbonization, this path to net zero, and they let him go over this. Now they're abandoning their net zero pledges or pushing them back decades, when no one's going to be alive in the current moment. So they're just kicking the can down the road. But there is some hope from some of these financial institutions that they are going to start embracing American energy again and stop weaponizing capital against them. So, like I said, cautiously optimistic there. I was surprised to get the email from a Wells Fargo official today letting me know about that. But like I said, I'm
Well,
cautiously
Jason,
optimistic.
I just want to add there. I think we have to be really, we're getting like a fire hose of policies right now and information, right? We've been wanting to do these conversations to talk about all the executive orders, and you were talking about we're just winning on all these fronts. Well, I think people have to realize is that you do have to see the continuity in these policies. And again, I think I'm getting going to get criticized for being called a neocon or too pro Trump on this, but you have to read through the executive orders and then listen to Chris Wright and how he's talking about this. There's a thread here about energy and manufacturing in the US. And you can't change this. We're trying to change this overnight, but this is decades of bad policy making in the US where relinquished uh, we've relinquished all our manufacturing to China because they're a cheap source of this, because they use forced labor and they have very cheap coal that they further subsidize. Europe has already done this. And so Europe they've had a war for 3 years in their right next to them, and yet they haven't built up the manufacturing, the capacity and the build up, and even changed their energy policies so they can make weapons to support their ally and so on their doorstep. So it takes, I mean, we have to have massive changes, especially here in the U.S., to actually change these policies. And so, I think when you're reading through when you're looking at the tariff policies, when you're thinking about China, when you're hearing this thread about manufacturing, and you're listening and you're reading through the executive orders on energy, you hear this geopolitical thread and this talk about manufacturing at home. And a lot of that, this is about peace through strength. This is a lot about we're going to make it here. And it's not, we're just going to make our t-shirts here. This is, we're going to make the entire value chain of stuff here. And we got to stop exporting this to our adversary. This is, it's, yes, it's about energy, but it's about a lot more than that. It is about economic dominance as well.
Absolutely. Any big news that you've seen come out of DC that's really grabbed your attention, and any big actions that we haven't discussed so far? I know I've got an entire screen of just full of different news clips and X posts and LinkedIn stuff that have just been blowing my mind. But Trisha, anything that stands out to you as some of the biggest policy shifts or news so far in the last 39 days?
I mean, those are the big ones. I think it's collectively, right? I'm still waiting for I'm waiting for the clarity on tariffs. So, and
Yeah.
that's what the stock market's waiting for as well, right? We're waiting for this clarity on tariffs, and they've just keep coming, right? And they haven't been implemented, but they keep coming. So waiting for that. And I'm not saying every tariff I think is going to be perfect or that's going to work, but I think we do have to wait for those. And we need clarity. Like, we don't have people in every position, right? There's lots of people under Rubio. There's lots of people under Bassett that don't have job, like the positions are not filled. And so, and you have to remember, folks, we do have a lot of bureaucracy in Washington. We had it in the first Trump administration when think you don't just fire everyone within the State Department or fire every like in these departments, right? So you have holdovers. And so when I heard this on TV, and I mentioned this earlier in a previous podcast, but I heard this on TV last night. There was a guy on Bloomberg and he was saying, hey, look, when you buy a house, you go into a house and you like repaint it and you're the new owner and you may fix the fence or whatever. Trump is in the house and he is not repainting the outside. He is ripping it to the damn studs and rebuilding the house from the inside out. And so he's got 4 years. And so I think if you are viewing this, like if you're trying to just look at a soundbite on TV and think you know what's going on, you do not. This is an administration that is looking to change the way government is run in Washington and weighing to change the temperature and the way we are interacting with other countries. So I really do think it's important. I think, something I'm feeling that is coming out is that all this talk with Zelensky and everything is that we don't want to be a global player. We are absolutely a global player. I just think Trump wants to change the terms at which how we played the game.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I tell you, the news has been overwhelming. It's just like we could just continue this live stream, probably live nonstop, and there would be news. I'm hearing about cabinet members getting texts from the president at 1:30 in the morning, checking in on projects, seeing where they are. It's just fascinating to me. But I do love that this Doge, this Department of Government Efficiency, they have a leaderboard, a scoreboard of government efficiency, and that the EPA is ranked third on their list. I think it's interesting because I don't believe the Secretary of Education has even been confirmed yet, Linda McMahon, but they're ranked number one in their efficiency efforts so far. I think this scoreboard is so because I believe me, I know Scott Turner, the Secretary for Housing and Urban Development. I know Brooke. There's several cabinet members that I have close personal relationships with, and I know they're competitive. And I know that scoreboard is going to motivate them to try to move up the scoreboard and be number one at being more efficient and good stewards with Americans' tax dollars. But, Lee Zeldin so far has canceled 21 wasteful, racist, and DEI and environmental justice grants, racking up $67 million more in savings. They just froze the assets of $20 billion sitting in accounts at Citibank just this week. That's $20 billion. These are the gold bars. If you saw the leaked video of some EPA official, I think it was last December, early January, before Trump was sworn in, talking about how they're trying to give away $20 billion. Two of that to a Stacey Abrams group that had raised $100 in 2023. $100 and was going to be awarded $2 billion for environmental justice grants. That's our money. That's an astounding amount of money, but that's $20 billion that Zeldin has frozen right now and trying to claw that back. I hear that the FBI has just launched some investigations into this, which I think is incredibly appropriate. One of my favorite senators, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse, and I joke sarcastically, we had a good banter back and forth when I was testifying in front of the Senate a few years ago, where he attacked me, and I had a little bit of fun with him talking about how everybody benefits from fossil fuels, and I thought he was about to choke because he realized that I was telling the truth. But it turns out that his wife is involved with a nonprofit that has been receiving funding for things that he's been supportive of, appropriations to the tune of millions of dollars that have been benefiting him and his family personally, allegedly. This has come out from a couple of ethics watchdogs. So I look forward to getting to that. People should get into office to serve and not to be profit, not to make profits and to become more rich. But unfortunately, that's happened to far too many people. So there's just, like I said, been so much news. I tell you a couple of things that I am probably most excited about. The one that would be earth shattering is rescinding the endangerment finding. The endangerment finding is where the EPA, without direct recommendation or I guess guidance from Congress, had said that greenhouse gas emissions pose a health and human health risk and started regulating CO2, something that you and I are exhaling right now about 2.4 pounds per day. I'm told I probably do a little bit more because I mean, you probably do too, because we actually work out and exercise, but I think it's average American,
I thought you were going to say because I talk too much.
no, no, but that coffee is popping up your heart rate right now, and so you and I are living the high carbon lifestyle, just sitting here. But it's interesting that this rescission of the endangerment finding would up into the climate cartel and every single thing that they've been working on for decades, saving the endangerment finding has endangered the lives of millions of Americans because of higher cost of energy. And in some cases, it's actually taken people's lives. You look at the freeze in Texas in 2021 that resulted in over 200 people losing their lives because we didn't have power in this state, the energy powerhouse of the world. Our grid's still not fixed. I just saw polling this week that 55% of Texans still believe it's an issue, but we'll get to that here in a minute. But I just wanted to share with you some of the news that's just been kind of blowing my mind and getting me excited about what's going on in DC and optimistic.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really tricky. I mean, I say this because I do market intelligence for a living, and people they do want unbiased and unvarnished. Like you want intelligently based information and actionable, actionable insights. And I'm going to have opinions, right? So, and I don't agree with all my clients, don't always agree with me, and that's fine. And I think this is where it is really, really tricky, is because you're third, as you said, 39 days into the administration. And so for everyone to say they know what's going on, they don't. And I was just browsing through, as you were talking, just to update on White House policies. They're putting out stuff. I think it was the third one down on, if you're looking at White House articles, saying that Navarro, President Trump's aluminum tariffs, quote, far more than a trade battle. Like, they're putting that on the website, right? They're saying this is more than a trade battle. It is. It's more
Yeah.
than a trade battle, right? This is not just about trade. And I say you have to read this. And also, we're 39 days in. So I do caution people to think that if you think this is going to be more of the same, it's not. This is a administration that is looking to change the system, right? They want to create more government efficiency. They want to reduce spending. They want to reduce the size of government, and they want to reduce the role of government in your lives. That's very, very different. And I think this is a little hard. It is kind of hard, I think, for the market to assess, because we had 4 years of a Biden administration that was far more far to the left, far more socialist, and far more big government than people realized when they voted him in. And so then you have this massive big government, massive spending, and you did not have the criticism. You had like very, very little criticism on the stock market. And so it's so important to appreciate that, like, everybody's asking themselves why we're having devaluations in the stock market and why things are selling off. Well, I don't know. When you're trading 97 times forward earnings, or your PE ratios are completely out of whack, or, you're really inflated, you were going to come down. And so what we had was everybody priced to perfection and all these things that were great, and lots of government spending in the system, and companies, publicly traded companies, were benefiting from that. And now we have a pullback and all that. So the whole economy sort of has to reassess. It doesn't mean you're going to tank. And I would say, again, actions. Wait for these policies to come through, and the actions. Are people going to sell off? Are people going to get nervous? Absolutely. And I do think, there's a lot of questions from the oil and gas community, is what are prices going to be, where oil price is going to be. And the one thing I'm overwhelmingly telling people and telling clients and telling just everyone when they ask, and folks that are asking me, is that I'm going to be able to tell you where prices are at and why they're there. I don't think if you see upside in prices like to 80, that's recession. You don't want that. Trump doesn't want that. But how much downside we have, I'm not worried about $45 oil. And maybe technically, if I go to 50 and I've got a discount and I'm in North Dakota, I may have to think about that for a little bit. However, something that Chris Wright has already said and made in his first day with his 9 bullet points that he mentioned was refilling the SPR. And he explained explicitly, we heard Trump say in his inauguration talk, we're going to refill the SPR to the tippity top. Again, that is about security, folks. That is about a president who understands energy and understands we are not using the SPR to just sell it off and have it to lower prices. And Chris Wright doubled down on that and said we're going to refill it because this is about making sure we don't need it. So this is about making sure we're prepared, or allies are prepared in case somebody needs it, heaven forbid. So that is a huge card, and I say like a trump card. That's a massive card in your pocket to play. That means that if prices get low, that's a great opportunity for the US to put a floor on prices and to start refilling that. I do think that needs to get articulated to the industry, where, how some of these energy policies need to get articulated to the industry, of saying, okay, we are going to, but they're probably telling the Saudis that as well, is we're going to have a floor on prices. And the Saudis are looking at this saying, you're sanctioning Iran, you're enforcing your sanctions, you're sanctioning Venezuela, and we're bringing barrels back. And that's essentially what they've said. All this hasn't, this has to work through the market and work through everything. But you can't have higher prices in an environment where we already have inflation and we already have this pain in inflation. And we could talk about inflation a little bit in some of the recent reads as well. But I'll stop there. Sorry.
Sure, and I know you follow China closely, and I saw just a couple of days ago, Taiwanese boarded a Chinese vessel that was destroying cables underground between Taiwan. Does that raise the specter of some conflict that might happen, and even give more reason and credence for refilling the strategic petroleum reserve?
So the answer is yes. There's enough even without that, there's enough global geopolitical volatility to make sure you have the SPR refilled. But I would say that China is probably looking at this right now and saying, assessing, the whole situation, right? We don't know when they want to take Taiwan. We do know that they want it. If they can get it peacefully, that'll be great. If they can do it like Hong Kong during COVID, where everybody's busy worrying about COVID in their own countries, and they just take it and we do nothing, and we should have done something, and we should absolutely do something on Taiwan. That's they're assessing this, right? So they're going to keep doing things. They just had, this got lost in the news on Sunday. China was just it was like near Tanzania and Australia. It was technically in international waters, so they could do it, but they were just live firing. And so, well, why are they live firing in the middle of the water unless they're saber rattling, right? Unless they just want to like tell Australia, don't mess with us, like we're here. And so, like, is the US, do we just go around to Australia and just live fire to say, no, we don't? So, we should probably be doing that in some Middle Eastern waters, and we should be doing that around Russia, and we should be doing more of that. But this is this is something, and this is where if the administration is listening, you know, the administration is doing a new thing where they're being more ambiguous on Taiwan. I thought that's what you were going to ask. Is that we're going back to our policies of being ambiguous. Biden had spoke many times that we will come to the defense of Taiwan. That's usually they try to get presidents not to say that because they want this strategic ambiguity. And I
Mm.
think we need to stop being ambiguous. We need to tell China to go stick it,
Yep.
and we need to say we're serious about this. You want to decouple, we want to decouple, but we're going to be prepared, and we need to be honest about this, and we can continue to have conversations. The fact that we have as many conversations as we do with China, but people get really upset, we decide that we need to talk to Russia. You have to like. I'm not always for just talking to them, but if we can talk to China after they've got a balloon flying over our country and doing all the stuff that they've done to us, but we can't have an opening salvo with Russia, that's ridiculous. I'm not saying I agree with it. I'm just saying it's ridiculous. You're gonna have to converse with these countries, whether you like them or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything that Congress, excuse me, or the administration should be doing, you think? And I know I'm really excited because we're going to do an American Energy update to our members, companies that have joined, and their employees that want to join as well, those that support us financially. You can see our members at our website, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com. But those people, we're doing a private event for them. We've got Congressman August Pfluger that'll be joining us. This is, I believe, March 10th in the late afternoon. Their Congress is on like a short, they're off that day anyways. Well, he's not. He's flying into DC, but he's willing to join us and talk about some of the work that he's doing. And I know we're going to be able to sing his praises on the methane tax, which I'm really excited about. But are there any other federal policies that we need to be educating people about and having them contact their members of Congress and advocating for, or within the administration?
Yes. So I think it's probably getting to this utilities piece, right? It's really getting to this cost of electricity and coal. And I say this really seriously. I think that so if you're hearing me and you're hearing I'm concerned about the global economy, yes, I am. Two, there are a lot of geopolitical things going on and wars and messiness and lack of clarity on policies. That needs to be clarified. But three, I am bullish on American energy, and I'm not. It's not just because I'm super rah rah. It's because the policies that we have an opportunity in the US, we have the energy. And actually, even in a lower price environment, when you're deregulating or if we're deregulating, we can drill on federal land and we have slightly higher natural gas prices. We're giving a real opportunity for the oil and gas community in the US. And so it's becoming investable. So I think the deregulations are significant. So I think that's something that this stuff has to be understood by the folks in Washington, and the folks in Congress has to understand this. And so they may hear a lot of just nervousness, right? That the economy is slipping and oil prices are slipping. Well, that also gives a lot of opportunity for deals to be done and everything. You do not need $80 oil to drill for oil in the US. $70 oil is fine, 65 is fine, even 60. It's the stability in price that matters a great deal. And so it's that kind of understanding. It's basically making sure we are permitting, we're opening up federal land, and we're making clarity on oil and gas for future investments. When it comes to coal and it comes to natural gas, I think really need to be focusing on how do we get more natural gas into power generation? How do we as pull in as much natural gas, probably try to actually remove the wind and solar, and how do we immediately stop all decommissioning of coal? I know that's something that actually I was talking with Emily Arthun about. That's like if we can stop decommissioning of coal now, that is at least one thing that we could start. I think we do need to also appreciate that we basically have a moratorium on all new coal mines in the US. So we need more education and clarity on coal in the US, where it's coming from, the fact that we need to maintain our production, the fact that we need to maintain it, very much thinking like the SPR. You don't have to We may not need it right now, but we may need it in the future, or we may need to make sure our allies have it in the future, because it's so stable and it's so energy secure. So I think education on coal, stop decommissioning of coal now, like immediately. We need to ban that or stop that, and then we need to be bringing in more natural gas to the grid, and we need to get those cost savings passed on to the consumer. Those would be massive. We have it. It's easy to do. You could just stop decommissioning. You could, and then we need to start working on policies that make sure that just like when you go to the pump and you feel prices rise at the pump and you feel prices drop at the pump, I want people to feel that in their utility bills with natural gas, where they do not. If I'm the utility provider and my job is to make sure it's affordable and reliable, I need to be doing that. That should be my job, and I'd be passing that on to the consumer. So I would like regulation. I would like education on this, of looking at utility providers and saying, how much money are you pocketing on this abuse of natural gas prices?
Yeah, it's one of the reasons that led me to start the American Energy Institute a few years ago was I was seeing other trade organizations that, naturally oil and gas were bashing coal to try to capture market share. Like, oh, coal's bad because of CO2 emissions. And it's one of our board members would say, and quotes Churchill often, talks about, Churchill says an appeaser is someone who feeds the crocodiles, hoping they'll be the last ones eaten. And I like to say at the American Energy Institute, we don't feed the crocodiles, we wear them. Got a nice pair of Cayman boots. They're so comfortable. But that's just kind of our mantra, and we're not going to attack one source of energy. And then I've even worked with people on messaging this because, like, oh, because natural gas is half the CO2 emissions of coal. So you're just saying if coal is bad, then natural gas is just half bad. No, they're not. They're both great. They're both affordable, reliable, and thanks to our pollution control technology, which I heard someone at the Texas Public Policy Foundation's Texas Policy Summit last week during a panel, talking about coal and heavy metals. And I'm like, are you kidding me? We have baghouses and scrubbers. We've reduced pollution in this country nearly 80% over the last 5 decades. We're world leaders in clean air. We're number one when it comes to access to clean and safe drinking water. And what we found out during Winter Storm Uri is natural gas got their supply cut off because the grid management said, hey, begin rolling outages now to
Right.
try to force demand down and stop a blackout from happening. Well, they turned off the gas in the Permian Basin, and natural gas supply went from 18.4 billion cubic feet to 4 billion cubic feet with the flip of a switch. But what didn't lose supply? Coal. These coal fired power plants had months of supply sitting in rail cars waiting to keep the electricity going. And they did. They saved lives during Winter Storm Uri. We need more of it here in the United States. I'm one of these people that used to, as a politician, before I had the information, was like, oh, yeah, we need to transition from coal to natural gas. It's better. I was just told all these things. It's cleaner, it's safer. No, it's not. I mean,
Well,
it,
so I think it's this type of understanding that has to be done, right? And this is where I
yes,
really want to educate. I want to take more, folks from Washington. I want to take them to Wyoming. I want them to see it's incredible when you see this, the actual coal mines, right? How efficient they are, how well run they are. I mean, you could literally eat off some of these coal mine floors, the actual ones, because they're so damn clean. I
spotless.
mean, it's run really well. We're not doing with forced labor. We're not doing with child. We have rule of law like you should be doing in the U.S. But I will say that you have to understand market forces, and natural gas was largely the market force, in addition to some regulation. But a lot of it was we have a crap ton of natural gas, and that beat out coal. Now, what has to be understood is that, and natural gas is extremely energy dense fuel. That's why in terms it's better than coal is because the energy density. Now you have to compare on BTU basis, and yes, we do have clean scrubbers and we do have all this stuff. But is it a little cleaner from like an energy density point? Does it have a little less of pollutants? Yes. On a CO2 emissions, I don't really care. That is not my number one problem right now. And from an energy security standpoint, people just have to realize that natural gas is a gas. You have to compress it. You have to build infrastructure from the wellhead to your house. There's a lot of infrastructure, and that's why it hasn't gotten built out in a lot of countries. Why do you think China doesn't have it? It's because they have the coal. They have not built the natural gas infrastructure. They never will because they don't have the natural gas. In the US, we built all this, but you have to have compression. You have to move this so that from an energy security standpoint, coal, you dig it up and you stick it next to the power plant. Trump talked about this, like Chris Wright talks about this, like it's very energy secure. And you have to realize that China is building their entire country, their everything, their every policy is based on this coal-fired power generation. So the US thinking about how we can use more natural gas and how we can use backstop that with all those, anytime we do have a price variability in natural gas, we can use that coal. That's great. Like the energy security for that, the fact that Colorado's one third of our power generation is coming from coal right now in Colorado, and one third, and
Right.
it's going to be decommissioned from this year till 2031, all of it. So you're going to decommission seven I believe it's 7 coal-fired power plants. That's a third of your power generation you're gonna decommission between now and 2031 with replacements with wind and solar when my bill is already $300 a month. That's absolute insanity. So people have to realize the role that coal plays, and you're saying this, so I'm just re-articulating it a different way. It's that baseload dispatchable power. And from an energy security standpoint, you cannot underscore and underline this enough. It's so, so important. And it doesn't mean that natural gas is worse or anything. It just means that we have all this stuff. And from an energy security standpoint, from a grid reliability and cost standpoint, it's huge. And we've lost that in the past, not just past 4 years, but decades. We've lost this as we go green and we push this, we just kill coal. And it was so awful for the natural gas industry was a part of it. I mean,
Mhm.
Chesapeake was writing checks. Aubrey McClellan was writing checks to Sierra Club. Like, stop doing that. So it was like, oh, we'll turn the back and the knife of coal and then we'll have natural gas. No, now we all need to be working together because, and this is about American prosperity. This is about manufacturing. This is about the American consumer being able to turn their lights on and not worry about this. And we have all this energy. We should really not have this problem. And we don't have to build. The great thing with coal is we don't have to build the pipelines, the infrastructure. So any place that's having issues with power generation, we just can get some train loads of coal and just stockpile it there and they can backstop it. And you're right, with all of our technologies and our scrubbers and everything, we don't really have to be worried about this. Like, we're not just going to like double our coal power, our consumption overnight. It's declined massively. We need
Yeah.
to stop that decline and that decommissioning and that forcing that decommissioning. And we do need to be talking to our allies about stockpiling coal and having it and using, like Germany, stop decommissioning your coal. We have to have these hard conversations on energy so that we don't have to have the hard conversation on the military, which we're having right now in Europe.
Yep, absolutely. And it's interesting what Colorado and Utah will look like is Haiti and the Dominican Republic, where you just look at a satellite picture and you can see Haiti is completely deforested because they don't have access to affordable and reliable energy. So they use the wood. That's what Colorado is going to do. And Utah has a law that's put in place, I believe, last year that says if you decommission or early retire something, you have to replace it with an equal megawatt generator. So you can't take down coal and replace it with wind because it's not going to have the same reliability factor. You essentially, if you're going to get rid of coal, you have to replace it with coal or natural gas, and certainly nuclear would take too long to replace it. But I think that's a good step in the right direction. But I want to jump in real quick. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the comments in YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn or wherever you're watching on, and even do it after the show if you're watching this after it was live. I know Trisha and I'll probably monitor some of the comments to see if we can come
Yeah,
back
please
and
do.
answer some questions. And you can find Trisha, PetroNerds CEO of PetroNerds, host of the PetroNerds podcast. You can see that podcast and listen to that podcast. I like to see it. You can listen to it on all the podcast platforms. Is that right? All the
Yep.
podcast platforms.
Yep.
But let's
iTunes, everything. Yep.
Awesome. I want to talk a little bit about some of the legislation that's before our legislators, our state legislators right now. One of them is there's a hearing on Monday in South Dakota. The South Dakota State Affairs Senate Committee will be meeting. I believe it's at 10 a.m. It could be 8 a.m. I just finished written testimony in support of a private property rights bill. It's House Bill 1052. It passed the House like 49 to 15 or something like that. Overwhelming support out of the House. But it essentially says that you can't use eminent domain for carbon capture pipelines, which I think is an egregious abuse of private property rights if you're going to steal someone's property that has no benefit whatsoever. There's zero cost benefit analysis on carbon capture. It's only benefiting corporate cronyism, the grifters that want to benefit off of our inflationary subsidies and tax dollars. So if you know anybody in South Dakota, or you can actually submit written testimony to the committee. I know I am. I believe Texas Railroad Commissioner Wayne Christian is, who just published a great op-ed in World Oil earlier this week, just talking about the grift. It's time to end the subsidies, and he's talking about all the subsidies: wind, solar, oil, gas. Really impressed with his leadership and his comments there in World Oil about ending subsidies. We need to level the playing field. It's certainly not level when it comes to grid production right now. There's a few bills and few rulemaking considerations in Texas right now. I think there's a big one, Senate Bill 714 in Texas by Senator Sparks, which essentially offsets the subsidies that unreliable variable sources of electric generation receive, and gives them to the state. And then what the state can do is then use those subsidies to buy down the cost of electricity, so that the ones that are causing the volatility in the market are actually paying for it, which has been directed from our governor in Texas since July 6, 2021, and his directive to the Public Utility Commission to allocate costs to wind and solar, which they have not done. They haven't begun studying it. They're not elected officials. They don't feel the heat like politicians do. And unfortunately, I wish they would begin implementations of those rules and start doing that and making wind and solar pay for those costs. Senator Sparks also has Senate Bill 715, which tells tells the PUC that they have to implement a reliability standard for all generation. That means that wind and solar are going to have to meet certain minimum generation requirements. There's no favorability for them just to hop on whenever the wind's blowing or the sun is shining and sell really cheap electricity because it's so heavily subsidized. I personally think we need a bifurcated market, one for reliable only generation and one for variable generation. The reliability has a much higher price cap, and then the variable generation could have a much lower price cap. And they could play in either market. It's just going to force them to be reliable, which means they'll have to build quick start natural gas generation. And then lastly, I'll end with a nuisance lawsuit bill. There's actually a U.S. House is hearing, I think, hearing the judicial subcommittee that Chip Roy is the chair of on Tuesday about these nuisance lawsuits. And you have companies, law firms working with prosecutors, DAs, and attorney generals around the country to sue fossil fuel companies, energy companies. Senator Middleton in Texas has Senate Bill 779, which would stop these nuisance lawsuits from these lower courts in the state of Texas, which would be a good step in the right direction. So far, dozens of them have been completely dismissed. Earlier today, Our Children's Future, which doesn't care anything about the 40,000 children in the Congo mining rare earths and cobalt, doesn't care about them, just cares about some woke kids in Virginia that they've corrupted into thinking that they're living in a catastrophic climate crisis. And if they are, they're living very well. But their suit was thrown out earlier this week. So a good decision there. I saw that headline in E&E News. And speaking of E&E News, they targeted the American Energy Institute today with a hit piece, which I love hit pieces, especially when they're coming from the left. Unfortunately, because they've lost millions of dollars in revenue because employees of the federal government are no longer getting paid subscriptions to Politico and E&E News. Not as many people are going to see this article as I'd hoped, but they go after us because we've been bringing to attention the Environmental Law Institute in DC, a nonprofit that has been receiving funding from the Civic Action Fund, which is part of the Tides Foundation, which the Tides Foundation has been receiving millions of dollars from. Yes, you guessed it, your tax dollars through U.S. aid. But we're exposing because they're partnering with these litigation firms that are suing energy producers and saying they've been hiding information about the climate debate. We launched climatedebatehistory.com, I think a couple of days ago, a project of the American Energy Institute. It's been debated for 200 years. I mean, it's absolutely absurd, but great leadership there in E&E News, raising our profile and showing how valid we are as an
I feel like when
organization.
you're getting the hit pieces or I'm getting these trolls, these, like,
Mm,
climate trolls that are commenting on my stuff, and it's like everybody says it's like that's when you know you're doing something, right? When you start getting
exactly right.
this pushback. So, yeah, I have a few of those every time I post something there.
That's
That's
great.
great.
Well, hey, appreciate everybody joining in. Tricia, thanks for having it. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for joining us. Where can everybody find you?
Yep. So you can reach out to me, cold reach outs, which I get plenty on the website. So there's a email thing. It's contact us at petronerds.com. So go onto the website, check it out. LinkedIn, I do a lot of posting. I'll probably
A
do
lot
some
of
posting
posting on
today.
LinkedIn.
And yeah, so a lot of posting on LinkedIn. And listen to the podcast. And I mean, I'm doing a lot of public speaking. I'll be in. I'm headed to Washington next week. To do some a workshop on energy, and then I'll be in Texas speaking at the Houston Producers Forum. So if you're in Houston, please sign up. I'm really pumped to be speaking at that. And then I'll be in Lubbock to talking to the university there, and speaking to a bunch of students and folks within the community. So really pumped about that on March 24th, I think, and then April 1st here at the Colorado School of Mines. So I'll get these posted, but yeah, lots of public speaking and lots. I'll be doing more with Jason as well. So we'll make sure that's all publicized.
Great. Trisha Curtis, CEO of PetroNerds and host of the PetroNerds podcast. I'll be sure and put links to those in the description on YouTube and the other networks that this is showing on. I'm Jason Isaac, founder and CEO of the American Energy Institute, telling you to keep living the high carbon lifestyle and hope that the rest of the world does too. Until next time, thanks so much. We'll see you.
Thanks. Bye.
Hang on until, man, perfect timing. My screen went out right when I clicked.